Stuff as well. Thanks. All right. Hi, everyone. Seems we're live. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Great to be back online. And I hope the sound works well and you can hear me loud and clear. If there are any issues, always flag it in the chat, please. So, for this session, I will continue working on Mr. Mikhail the 16th, Jędza's bodyguard, Jędza's henchman, the walking tank. It's a model that is well liked by all Seeker players and no one else, or all Explorer players who take him out of keyword because he's such a utility piece. So last time I spent most of the stream painting his face. That took more than an hour. And I got to the point where I was fairly happy with the eyes, with the shades. So as you will see in the zoom, I will try to hold it steady. The face looks fully three-dimensional at this stage. There are shades closer to the hair section. There are visible highlights on the forehead, on the peak of the nose, on the cheekbones. So it all looks pretty good. There are still those golden ornaments that I need to complete on his beard. And that's it. Rather than that, it's all base colors. So those are some mixes of glazes that I've used for his cloak, for his robes, for the leather armor. Hi, Isabel. Thank you. And the idea was that I was going to use warm colors in some spots, like his shoes, head, and leather armor. And that will be counterbalanced with colder colors. And the goal is here to move for today's session, to move from this not that fully dimensional look of clothes to something like I did here on Jędza, where you can clearly see the highlights. And it's much brighter here, much darker in the recesses, and the details really pop up here. So today, I'm going to prepare all the details for, and hopefully even paint them up to this level, where they really pop, where you look at the miniature and you immediately see the depth of color and the highlights pop up on those, and the details are clearly visible. In the meanwhile, I'll just update you on the recent work I've done. So a couple of other Explorer miniatures I painted recently. The Archivist, such a great miniature. I have to say that painting the face that has no lips was more challenging than I had thought. Not to mention painting a face that has 3 pairs of eyes. And I also did the spell eaters. I believe they are called spell eaters. So 3 separate miniatures, also 3 sets of 3 pairs of eyes on each. They were fairly easy to assemble. The spell effects around them were a bit more complex, and I was struggling a bit to mount them on bases in a way that they hold firm, but somehow made it work. I didn't go with the official artwork because while I love the artwork, they are super dark in the artwork, and that's really hard to replicate to use such limited palette. So I went for a bit different set of colors. Now back to Mikhail. So I will start with I will go inside out on him. So I will start with this section of his clothes, the internal part. A bit out of focus, but we'll get back there in a second. And I will just apply first Thalassal blue. Then since I don't want that strong, vibrant blue, which is perfectly suitable for Space Marines and that kind of aesthetics, I will break it down a little bit with a gentle touch of snakebite leather. Just a drop from the pot. And then I will use a little bit of lime medium. So that's more or less the color that I've used initially. I will give it a mix. Text it on the palette. It's fairly dark, maybe even a bit more of blue. So here I'm kind of trying to replicate the color I used for the base color here, which is okay now. And now, maybe even slightly, you know what, I think it's still too brownish, not blue enough. So I've removed a bit of the mixture with tissue. I will readjust it. Don't want to go wrong here. I want this slightly off blue. That was too greenish for my liking. That's better. Now the mixture is pretty much ready. I will just add a drop of lime medium to make sure it flows better. And I will add a touch of bone white because we are doing highlights now. So this strategy of making the mix, which I can control because I don't need to mix all of that. I will mix it gradually by adding more and more of this off-white color. This should allow me to build up highlights in a much more coherent way, meaning that I use the base color mixed with much brighter shade, and it's thinned down to consistency of milk, you can say, but it doesn't have to be milk. It just has to flow well. So you can test it on your fingernail. As you can see, it tints it. It doesn't leave a very strong mark, just tints it. So that's what I'm looking for here. Because with highlights, and I'm going to take it slow, if you want to build up a nice gradient type of highlight where the color changes smoothly from the darker base coat to much brighter highlighted color, you can essentially work on the same surface, cover it with smooth brush strokes a few times, because the paint is now really thinned down, which means that it doesn't impact that heavily. And it will just be easy to build up the solid highlight if it is applied in a few successive layers. Just make sure that you don't go, when you do this, paint this way, don't touch the area which has paint on it because you impact the process of drying. It tends to pull if there is too much, but if it just dries, if you touch it, retouch it before it's dry, it will just drag over the highlighted part and create some kind of nasty holes in the structure of clear highlights. Hello, my bluff. Good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Hope you're having good time, maybe even painting your own minis. And also another benefit of mixing it standard paint with contrast colors and Lamian medium is that they just lose the shine, and I don't want my models to look glossy, shiny. In some cases it can be the desired effect, but that's not what I'm going for here. I'm going for this much more subdued, worn look. I'm good, pretty good, thanks. It's it's a busy time of year. I think that typically we see it in many industries that things tend to ramp up before the Christmas break. I'm definitely experiencing that. So business is good, but business is busy, and I'm not talking about painting, just my regular job. But it's good for me. Even if I have to work overtime or do extra work, it's all good as long as I have time to read bedtime story to my kids. Then I'm good. I can work on, and I can, as long as I find time for my hobby, which I'm more than happy to share with you guys, because that's the soothing part, really. It's often underestimated how good it is for our brains just to slow down. Because, okay, you can do speed painting, which is also fun, but if you force yourself to calm down after a busy day and just enjoy a painting session and have this privilege, like I do, sharing with other people, with other people who are passionate about the hobby, then it's a perfect setup. Really soothing hobby. Favorite bedtime story? My kids are 4 and 6.5. Well, the younger one is almost 4. She will be 4 on the beginning of January. So she's almost 4. So they've been going through this stage where they love listening to the same story over and over again. So it's been challenging. It's like a broken record. You read all over the same stuff over and over again. But I would say for the I'm very confused for a second. Yeah, could be confusing. But I would say that last summer I read the older one, Harry Potter books, the first two. She loved them. So I would say that those might be her favorite. She also loves the books from the books that were used as a source for How to Train Your Dragon. There are a couple of them. I think there are about 10 of them, but only half of them have been translated to Polish so far. So they are quite good. But it's really great when you get to this stage when you can read to your kids books that you also enjoy. Because I never read Harry Potter before, and after reading first 2 books to my daughter, I just went on and read the whole series, and it was a very good experience. I mean, I listen to audiobooks for the most part while painting. So as I'm speaking, I'm gradually building up this successive highlight structure. Let me pause for a second. Make sure I get sharp quality. There we go. So building up. Never painted any minis. How come? I mean, that's fair enough. Some people just enjoy other aspects of the hobby. It's another aspect that, well, some people just love playing and hate painting, which is fair enough. Different strokes for different folks, I believe. I know one guy, he's one of the best players in Poland. He hates painting, but he loves playing the game. So he has his whole gremlin army painted as ghosts. He just drowns them in contrast paints in green or just basic colors. They look fine enough on the table, and he just doesn't waste time on this aspect of hobby. So now deciding how extreme I want to go with the highlights, and you can see that if I see that the contrast is too strong, I just blend it on the miniature. So kind of take the darker color, mix it with the brighter one on the miniature. And also when you paint, I'm a big fan of just taking a step back, looking at the model from a distance. You haven't really played a game of Malifaux. You haven't painted any miniatures. Sounds like you have a lot of catching up to do. Which is not a bad thing, because if I was to rediscover Malifaux again at this stage, wow, that would be exciting. My first memory of Malifaux ever was seeing the old Avatar miniatures. I think that I saw them on some hobby website. Could have been Cool Mini or not, or something like that. And I was just blown away. I saw this Lady Justice with these huge scales with Ram and Crow. And I think the Seamus, the big, bulky Seamus. And I just thought, well, I don't care what's the system, I want to paint these miniatures. So then I started browsing the store, looking at different crews that were available at that point in time. And I was hesitating between Summer, Nicodem, and Lady Justice. 10,000 wasn't even a faction back then. Misaki she was just a minion or a henchman in the first edition. I think she was just a minion. She was a mercenary or a henchman. Correct me if I'm wrong, but for sure she wasn't a master back then. So I settled for Lady Justice because I love those death marshals. Hey, Haunted. Good to know that you're a gamer as well. I like watching Vassal, having it in the background as I paint. I've never really played the game there. So I will use now kind of a hobby shortcut, because I'm going to grab a dry brush with thick bristle. I'm going to load some of the skeleton, or bone white, that's the name of the color. Bone white, skeleton, like whatever, it's just an off-white. And I'm going to very lightly, well, I will remove most of yeah, that's cool. That's good to know that you're a gamer as well, when duty calls, and I will give everything a light dry brush, just to pick up the details. And I'm using it to have this kind of map of how I want to place the highlights, especially on this section. I'm just feels like I need a little bit of help, if you will. This will just allow me to pick up the most protruding elements, just to realize when the extreme highlights will land. Oh yeah, it can be. Malifaux is a lot to take in when you begin. There are so many layers to the game, like so many things to keep track of: conditions, turns, points, soul stones, action points, wounds. It can be a bit overwhelming, but it's something that comes with time. Trust me, I've been there. When I played my first, I think out of my first 10 games, I lost probably 9 of them, simply because I just thought, whoa, okay, that's the end. Never even realized what was going on. And then you accumulate that knowledge, that better understanding of what works, what doesn't work, how to prioritize things. It accumulates, and the more you play, the more you learn, the better you get. So yeah, a few games for sure. And I do recommend sticking to the same crew, the same master. Just learn to play the hell out of one master, one crew. Get a firm understanding of synergies between different models in the crew. And once you feel comfortable, start adding versatile models. Yeah, so many of them to keep track of. Second guessing your opponent, which one they took. You can play Henchman Hardcore, which is this smaller sized option, just to get a firm understanding of the core mechanics of the game. That could be a good idea to begin with. Just play with, instead of 6 to 8 miniatures, play with around 4 miniatures per player, and just take it step by step. I feel you there. It gets stressful because you want to perform, you want to have a good game, you want also, if you're a good person, which I assume you are, you want your opponent to have a good time, and it feels awkward when you take ages to make up your mind what to do. That's why, a lot of people ask about which crews are good to begin with, which crews have this fairly easy core mechanics. And I'm no expert by far. I don't play much. Recently, in the last 2 months, I played maybe one game. I play Neverborn, and I would never advise anyone to start with Zoraida, for example, because she's a fairly complex master that requires good understanding of not only your crew, but the opponent's crew. For example, Titania, she's pretty straightforward, or Nekima, just fly in and smash face, and your models are fairly durable, so they can achieve a lot before dying. So look for, I would say that the key thing is to look for a crew that you like aesthetically, that really appeals to you. Pick people's brain on Discord. Just find the section of the faction that you're interested in. Let guys know that you're new into the game and looking for tips on starting X Master. People will give you idea of what to run on basic level, how to expand it. Just take it step by step. It takes a while, and I would say that I'm nowhere near where I would like to be in terms of skill level, but I still enjoy the game a lot when I play it. course, it feels good to win, but 99% of the time when I play, the atmosphere is good, people are friendly. They do not have this win at all cost attitude. Just enjoy the game. So maybe take a chill pill before the game and have a go at it, just step by step. Well, back to the miniature. I'm still applying the highlights on the blue robe, and I'm going to go to even brighter shades. And also one thing I would say that if you don't feel comfortable playing a certain crew, just ask someone, maybe play tested on Vassal. That's another thing. You don't need to commit to buying miniatures because certain playstyles just don't fit some people, and it takes a while to find the sweet spot of a crew that you enjoy, that you feel you can leverage its strengths and play around their weaknesses. Because if you're facing also, it's good if the person who you're up against initially has this realization that okay, you're new, so no, they will be pulling punches, because sometimes you may end up in a situation where it feels like you're playing rock paper scissors, where someone clearly recognizes the shortcomings of the crew or the master that you put on the table. They bring in some tech, that some selected pieces in the miniature in their crew that just work perfectly well against that master, and they make your life miserable. So it can happen in a tournament setup. But if it's a friendly game, then I just think it should be laid out clear that you're there to have fun, to learn. But it surely does take a while to get to this stage where you enjoy playing the game and don't stress out about remembering the rules, about spending a lot of time on activations. Once you've been through a couple of scenarios a few times, you'll just gradually feel more and more comfortable. So getting much brighter on the highlighted sections now, almost pure white there, which will be still worked over with a glaze of blue. I just need to grab it. Yeah, I will do that now, I think. It's whenever I played the game second time, my first learning game opponent didn't explain a single thing, but Mama Z, Cordelis, and Prosette. Oh, wow, that must have been painful. Yeah, some masters can be just a bad experience if you don't know what to expect. And Zoraida is clearly not the master to face when you're playing a friendly game and you're new to the hobby. So, not the greatest choice for sure. Because the thing about masters like Zoraida or New Yanlo is that if you're a new player, you're trying to get your head around how your crew works, and the opponent can exploit your own crew with their models. Yeah, and B, that's bad. That can put people off for sure. But glad you stack. So now I thinned down the blue blaze, and I'm using Quick Tone from Warpaint, from the Army Painter range. And I'm just applying it directly on the blue robe, which I want, because I want to have this cold, dark finish to it. So this kind of glaze on top of the highlights. It sort of smooths, keeps the highlights smoother, brings it all together nicely. I'll move to the back. And while it dries, I will start on the brighter section, so the coat. But let me pause for a second and just show to you guys what has been achieved. So clearly the highlights are distinctly visible, but there is a layer of thin glaze that kind of brings it all together. And always a good idea to look at the miniature from a couple different angles, see where the highlights look good, where the color should be darker. For example, that lower section, I can apply directly a bit more of a glaze there. And while it dries, I can also retouch with a bit more of glaze without the lime and medium. Just pick the most recessed areas. And that's more or less what we'll have for this part of the robe. So it looks glossy at this stage, but we'll get a more matte look when it dries completely. So now looking at the robe that he's wearing, the coat, I think I will still use this dark blue to work on the darkest section, on the recesses here. So for example, this area here, you can see the base color showing in the folds of his collar. So I will let some of the dark glaze into those parts, and the naturally formed folds here. And here. And here. Just picking up the folds on the material. And that way, those dark areas, which are shaded in a way, the same way in which the darker cloth is shaded, this will kind of bring it all together. Because I'm trying to have this slightly more coherent look for this part. It's just fun to work with different temperature of colors and play around with composing the palette on the miniature. Just looking at ways to tweak it so that it feels more coherent. But again, this is just my take on this model. I've already seen quite a few great examples of paint jobs on this model. I believe it's the Swamp Fiends. There is this podcast, Ballyful Theme podcast, which goes into some really deep dives on strategy and aspects of the gaming. And I think Cody, that's the name of the guy from this podcast, he painted his Mikhail so that he has this kind of twirling pattern on the robe, and it looks pretty cool. Oh, and since I'm talking about other people, other places, if you're watching this stream, please take a break, go to the Wyrd forums, and vote on the Rotten Harvest entries. So much good stuff there. Just go to the forums. It's easy to navigate them. There are some shortcuts just to go directly to the voting section. Check out the works, vote for those that you like. I think it's just one of the way to appreciate the effort people put into preparing their competition entries. Just vote for them. Of course, I'm not going to say which one I voted for, but if you hop over on the forums, well, thank you. Glad you like them. If you hop over to the forums, it literally takes you a minute and you will just give a thumbs up, appreciate other people for the hard work into preparing their competition entries. Yeah. So after I'm finished highlighting this brighter coat, I will give it a slightly thinned down glaze of Matic blue, just to kind of bind it all together. Yes, link from Kimberly leads to the post with all the polls linked within. Yeah, and today is the final day where you can submit your votes. So by all means, go for it, click on it. Yeah, comment on every entry. Still a couple of hours to go. And the number of entries is not that overwhelming. You can do it. So what I'm going to do now is I will prepare another mixture, this time a mix for highlighting the brighter cloak that Mikhail is wearing. Maybe before I go there, I will do one more thing. I will just mark with black Templar, so a really dark contrast paint. I will mark the area, I will mix it with the blue so that it's not pure black but slightly bluish, and I will just mark the areas where the buttons are so that the material around them is much darker. It will be just easier to pick them out for highlights. I believe I will keep them gold. And again, this is part of the overall composition that I have in mind, like this blue, dark blue, cold blue section, broken up with some gold buttons. Those buttons will be then much more distinctly visible. And the blade will be a challenge in itself, but we'll get there. We'll get there. And I was thinking about it, and now I'm in two minds because I think I will paint it differently to what I see in the artwork. And by the artwork, I mean the box art. So as you can see, the blade here is silver on the inside and golden on the outside. And I will probably do it the other way around. But I may still change my mind. Now for the highlights. Let's prepare a mix. So Matic blue, just this color. I will load my brush with it, put a few solid drops of it on the mixing pot, so on a 30mm base. I will just make sure to remove the previous color from it. And again, I will place a drop of bone white. I'm using different types of bone-like shades, so I don't remember all the names by heart. And now that I have it on the mixing pot, this is how it looks close up. So I can just grab with my brush a small amount of it, gradually mix it in with the Matic blue. If it's too thin, it won't be that effective, but I can test it. See, it's kind of semi-transparent, which means that I would need a couple of layers to produce a solid highlight. So I'll add a little bit more of bone white. Make sure I have a solid tip. And start building up highlights. Maybe I'll grab a different brush, because I'm going to be tackling larger surfaces. This cloak is quite big, and all right, I'm just testing the consistency of the paint on the piece of paper, and I'll just very lightly place it on the cloak. And what I'm doing here essentially is I'm doing my best to avoid the recesses. And as you can see, the color is not that much different than the base color. I'll just switch to a different brush, because I don't want to build up huge contrast at this stage. What I want is to start building up this gradual transition from the base coat to the highlight. So it's a lengthy process, takes some time, but I would say the effort is well worth it. And I mean, it already looks pretty good at this stage, but why not push it further? Why not add a couple more highlights? This model is like one of the centerpieces of this keyword, so I want him to really stand out among the crowd, which is tricky actually, because with Seeker keyword, each model is so cool that it stands out on its own, like the big pink jelly thing, Yenza, her totem, or pretty much any model from that keyword is impressive in its own right. But still, there is only one Mikhail the 16th, so he should get some proper brush treatment. So this technique is particularly beneficial when it comes to highlighting larger surfaces, like the back of his cloak, because there are, as you can see, there are those really large sections of material. And what ends up happening is that the transitions are just gradual, smooth, moving from the darker to brighter color. No need to hurry, just making sure that I also pick up the details when I look at the model from a different angle. Maybe a little bit at the bottom. The bottom doesn't really need that much attention, because I will give it a couple of glazes with darker blue anyway. So the basic transitions are there. And what's the next step? The same thing over again and again until I feel happy about it. But the thing is that it gives me more control of the highlighting process, because I know where I need to kick it up a notch and switch to brighter shade. While time consuming and possibly not the easiest technique, I just personally feel that it gives me a lot of control. because I can just do the same color over the same surface, just trying to target smaller areas. So I'm not going to do the whole back section, but I will just push two thinner lines, maybe a line here, a line lower. Same on the color. It just popped up in a fancy way. And one thing I've recently reflected on after watching video of Angel Giraldes, who is one of my favorite miniature painters. He has an amazing channel, and he also paints Wyrd miniatures. You might have seen some pictures of this large statue-size Sonia that he's been working on recently. He explained while painting texture that when you do a thing like, let me show you what I mean, like that on the edge, just this very stark contrast, it's kind of cool because it creates a nice level of contrast, but it works good on plastic, on metal surfaces. On clothes, it doesn't really work in a way that looks natural. So what he advocates is just working on smoother transition closer to the edges. So not just putting one thin line, but rather working on the whole texture fragment closer to the edge. So it might be something I will try. But you know, Angel Giraldes, he's just on the different plane of painter's existence. So that's some really high level thinking of painting from him. So at this point, with the cuffs and those really small areas, I will be dotting in the stippling in, however you call it. I will just be tapping my brush lightly so that while it gives the highlight, it creates this slightly texture-like finish on the cuff. So the highlight is there, but it is applied in a slightly irregular way, just to build on this idea that this is the kind of material that has seen better days. And I'll do the same on the flaps of the cloak. Just trying to target the area closer to the edge and create this slightly rough texture. Because when you think about cloak, it's the type of material that absorbs rain, dust, mud, anything. And Mikhail is a kind of person who travels a lot, so you would imagine that his clothes have seen better days and are not, well, brand new. So that's why I'm starting at this point to move from those super smooth highlights to this patchy, spotty, stippling-like technique. And I will be tapping my brush with this kind of seemingly random pattern on those surfaces. And for the next highlight, I will just use a slightly brighter shade of blue, mixing in more of white. just to build up on it, to create this smooth transition, because this section here, for example, while it looks cool, it doesn't have the kind of texture that I would like to see on a piece of material. So while it's perfectly fine working on those smooth highlights, I just had this idea that I will make it look like it has seen better days. So I'm not sure how much I'm able to present to you guys, but let me give it a try. And while it's in focus, now I will just use this dotting technique on the areas which I want to be brighter. So you might remember that I did those like 2 slightly brighter lines in the previous highlight part. So now I'm just working on those brighter stripes and just tapping it with the brush very lightly, because this is where his muscles flex when he swings his huge sword around. And this is where I would imagine the material sees a lot of wear and tear. Yeah, glad you like it. It's really time consuming, but it's well worth the effort. Because the final outcome will be, I will also glaze it with light blue, so it won't be that strongly visible, but it will still be noticeable. And it's also fun to play with textures on larger areas. It won't work on everything. Like if you think of large creatures like the Nephilim or the Garion, so the giants, this might not necessarily be the best approach there. Because on the skin you want these smooth transitions. And here, why not make your life a bit more complicated and just experiment with texture. The key thing to these highlights is just making it look random. So looking at it from the top, just visualizing where the most wear and tear would be, where the light would hit it from the top, what's the good angle, and just going in with the brush. Because the more random the highlights applied this way look like, the better the final effect will be. This will also be combined with dry pigment I will be using for the final part of the painting process on this one. And as you can see, I didn't use this technique on this part of the cloth. I'm just visualizing it to be, well, I'm thinking of it as a different type of material. It's not laziness, it's just different. When it comes to this kind of approach, I've recently read an interesting book called Atomic Habits about habit building and how to approach building habits in a structural way. And I really loved one of the terms that the author used there. And that's what sometimes I feel I'm doing, not only while painting, is that I'm proactively lazy. So proactively seeking the sweet spot where you feel super comfortable. But proactive laziness means that you put effort to reap benefits of the laziness. So you can think of some of aspects of the painting techniques that I employ as being proactively lazy. So not a bad thing, I guess. So now, since the aromatic blue is almost dry on my mixing mini palette. I will just apply a bit more of it. Mix more white there. And I'll be going with slightly brighter color. And that's already an hour worth of painting here. So quite a lot of progress within 1 hour, I would say. Still plenty to go. And if you think like, if you see that the highlights are still too contrasty, if you don't like them, just wipe them off with the tip of your finger. So again, using for reference these two brighter areas that I outlined in the previous stage, and just working around those two areas just to create this transition from slightly darker to slightly brighter. And the same on the back. And it's also good if your brush has an uneven tip. So this is not like, this is a rather older brush. So it doesn't have a strong tip, which is just what I want. Now I don't want a fine tip because I just wouldn't be able to create a random pattern. So keeping up with this texture building. Also looking at it from the front to see which spots I might have missed. So since it's Tuesday today, tomorrow we might see another reveal in Waldo's Weekly. I'm curious to see if we get some insights on new large-scale miniature. I think that during the Gen Con we saw Seamus. Was it also Sonia? And a miniature that looked like something like Titania or Lilith. Could have been Lilith. That would be an interesting touch to see her there. And I love this angelic-like figure that I think it might be Titania or Lilith. So some pictures of it on Wyrd Discord at some point. Guess we'll find out sooner or later. Sometimes it takes a while before a concept makes it to the book. Like this wind golem that we are getting in this new expansion book. I think I saw the first version of it, maybe even on previous Gen Con or some other big event, and no one knew what it was at that point. So it takes a while, but eventually things show up in the books. So this section I want to be completely brighter, so I'll push those stippling. I will push the highlights with stippling techniques a little further here. And also the interior part of the color. I will make sure that the random pattern goes not fully to the bottom of it, but like to roughly 50%. The same with the back, because I don't want to build this texture over all of it. Just select the areas. And it starts building up. Next, I guess I will move on to the leather section. Or maybe his pants. I'll see. And the more I work on this miniature, the more I appreciate the dynamic pose, the painting challenge it poses in itself. So it might seem like not much is happening, but trust me, it's piling up. The highlights, the texture is really starting to come to life. It's just a slow process. And I'm really trying to make sure that the texture I'm placing at this time doesn't cover the whole surface that I worked on 10 minutes ago. So now it's time to bring it together. So I'll use pure Aphomatic blue because it's a very light tone. It doesn't really change the color of the surface that much. You know what? I'll just be more careful here. I'll place some of it on the base. Put a drop of Lamian medium next to it. And just add a little bit of Lamian medium. See if you have a drop of one color of medium next to what you're working on. It gives you kind of control over what you can do with it. And as always, I start by tackling the areas that are not immediately visible, because if the color is too strong or if there's something wrong with the consistency, it won't be that impactful if I start with area that is not visible. So now while it affects the whole surface, it doesn't get rid of the highlights I've placed so painstakingly slow. But it kind of brings the whole composition together. I actually saw some videos of people just giving everything, the whole miniature, a glaze, just to kind of filter it through the shading that you have in mind for holistically. But I'm not going to do it here. It's not what I would want. I'm looking for some coherence, but with some still distinction between different sections. Yeah, painting texture can be fun. And I will tint some of the sections of this darker blue with brighter glaze as well, just to kind of bring it together. Now I don't even need to wait for it to dry completely. I will just go straight away to blue wash. Put a dot here. What I'm doing now is I'm mixing this dark blue with athematic blue and preparing a darker mix, which is not pure blue. It's broken down slightly with this athematic blue shade, and I will reapply it to the recesses just to make sure that the folds of the material are clearly noticeable, and areas like this section here or under the arm or the interior part here, they get slightly darker. So working my way around the highlights just to make sure I just affect the sections which I want to be slightly darker. And you can also do this stippling technique here. Why not? Once the ink flows in, you can try to redistribute it in a slightly uneven way, seemingly chaotic, just to work creatively on making the shades more clearly visible. If it becomes too glossy, it's not an issue because it will be all brought together with matte varnish. So here I had those two lines that I painted, and now as you can see, one is highlighted here, the other one is here, and I'm just stippling in a separating line between the two just to bring a bit more diversity to this section, a bit more of contrast. And what I don't feel happy about here is that this lower section still very similar to the upper section, so I'll stipple in some darker blue here. Because once it dries, it will create this nice transition from dark to bright. And again, here I was aiming for roughly 50% of the upper section. So here I will try to keep like 30% of the lower section. And I'm just saying roughly. It's painting for fun. It's not engineering where you need to be meticulous. Hey, welcome back. Let me get a sip of water. Okay, so now time to pause for a second, stretch out a little bit. And let's look at the model again. So compared to what I showed to you guys at the beginning of the stream, I think it's beginning to look more three-dimensional on different sections. So that's what I've been trying to achieve. Just make sure that those transitions between darker elements and brighter are really showing. Then there are still some areas for improvements, like see when I look at it from different angle, the internal part of the fold should be darker. It shouldn't be as bright as the part that has been highlighted because it's the recessed area. So I will just put a stronger glaze of blue. That will actually do it on most of the side here and here, and also to the back. Because this part, the below part, it's not really visible when you use the miniature in game, when you hold it in hand, but still I feel like I should make it a bit darker. Thank you, thank you. Glad you're liking it. So now I have a pretty rough outline on the pants. So I want to keep them dark. There's just barely, well, there's just very small part of his legs visible on the dark pants. So I'm going to use a bit of purple mixed with black to bring it together, and then maybe pick up some of the highlights, or maybe different way, the other way around. I will start with highlights. So again, I will work on just the texture. So again, being careful and slow. No need to hurry here. So again, just stippling in seemingly random highlights along the lines, because I did a dry brush here and it gave me a good sense of where the folds of the material are, and I'm just now going around the miniature and just literally tapping it with not so well shaped brush just to leave a seemingly random pattern. But what's happening essentially is that I'm creating this gradual highlight. It's a lot of contrast between black and what I have now, so it will take a few glazes to bring it together. So now it's time for this purple tone and a little bit of black. Maybe not contrast black, because contrast will take away all the purple I put in it. So more, as you can see, there are two dots. This big one is black wash, the smaller one is purple wash. So I will just absorb a little bit of purple into the black. Test it on the paper. Yeah, it's black, but there is a hint of blue in it, of purple in it, not blue, purple. Been painting too much blue. And I will just glaze it over the pants. While it dries, I will move on to the next section, because for the boots, they are quite bright. I only used this one here, snakebite leather. It's a really nice bright warm color, and I kind of like where I am with them now, but I still want to go a bit darker on them. So I'm going to take maybe soft tone or maybe mid-brown. I will start with mid-brown. So it's this slightly reddish brown that I will glaze over the boots. And I will just use it directly from the bottle. But since there is so much blue in it, I will just add a small hint of blue to that. So it's not pure brown, it's like broken with blue. And I will start darkening those boots a little bit. And that way the glaze flows into the recesses. It really impacts the elements which should naturally become darker. And then it's just the leather armor and the sword, which will be fun to work with. So for example here the paint is pulling a bit, so I'll just drag it to the back. Yeah, and those leather straps, I will also make sure that they are slightly darker in the middle. And now while it dries, I will get back to the black and purple glaze that I've created and put another layer of it on the dark trousers. And now I can also just use this black, kind of push it into the areas which should be even slightly darker. Yeah, that's more or less it. And now for the leather parts. This time I'm going to use pure soft tone. Put a little bit of it on the pot of the mixing pot that I have. And now how I got here, it was basically just the base color. So bleached, Wraithbone, dry brushed with white, and then I applied Gore Granta Flesh contrast paint and dry brushed over it, so it has this rough edge to it. Now I'll make it a bit smoother with soft tone from Army Painter, and as you can see it fills up the recesses nicely, keeps them much darker, evens the slightly rough finish that we had as a result of dry brush. And put it on all the leather belts. It's like a fashion statement. 3 belts on the forearm, 2 on the waist. Not sure how practical it is, but it looks cool. And it also gives me an opportunity to just plan the highlights in a way that I have those areas which are cold and which are warm. And by cold and warm, I mean the color temperature. So it's already looking different. I think I will also saturate that with a bit of red. So I will just get a small amount of Blood Angel's red, add a little tiny, less than a drop, just a tip of the brush, and mix it with the meat brown that I have, which will have this more of a reddish brown color. And I'll just work it slightly carefully over the surface while the paint is still drying, just to bring it together. And that way I have color that matches it with the scarf more. So those will be some of these focal points that attract attention and that are still fairly close one to another. And I will also saturate those straps on the boots a little bit more. Just to break apart the look, which seemed a bit more too cohesive there. I just want a little bit more of variety here. All right. So that's where I am with the progress. And now I notice that this area needs a bit more of a shade because this flap of the coat is just kind of becoming less pronounced, less visible. So I'll just make a very dark mix and carefully frame it into this section. Just by framing it, I mean applying a much darker glaze around it. Yep, that's more or less what I wanted to have here. And now I will continue with the sword. Let me just grab one thing really quick. It's getting a bit colder these days, but still felt a bit stuffy, so just needed a bit more fresh air. But here is the current stage. The color and lighting style that you're drawn to. That's a good question. Don't think there's one that I'm particularly drawn to. I'm kind of go with the flow painter. So each miniature is treated as a separate project, and I often start painting without having this finalized vision. So this is something that comes to me as I paint. Like for example, while I was working on these guys, the spell eaters, I didn't have a plan for them. I only knew that their heads then the skin would be pale white, the spell effects would be bright blue, and the clothes would be purple. That was my plan. And then I figured out that why not put slightly bluish metal armor on them and give them some vibrant bases. So that wasn't really a plan. It was something that just happened while I was painting. And here I would say that the style, I tend to use different mix of different styles. So blending, texture painting, dry brushing. Dry brushing is a great technique. It's sometimes looked down as this beginner's technique, but I mean, why would it be looked down on? In fact, I'm even going to dry brush something to prove a point, like this shoulder pad here. It feels like it became too brown. I want to break it apart, the cohesiveness here, so just very lightly dry brush it. And as you can see, I'm not just pushing the brush into the shoulder pad, just very lightly guiding it to the most protruding sections. So the question about painting style is, not sure how much I was able to answer your question, but I would say for sure variety of styles. And there are a number of artists that I like, that I follow, not only on Wyrd forums, also on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, other places. So really hard to pinpoint one thing. Diversification for sure. So now there is hardly any paint on the brush, so I'm just very gently going over some areas. Yeah, it was an answer. But thanks. I think that, and I don't consider myself a great painter. I think I'm just a kind of person who learns slowly, but is very consistent at doing that. So I don't even, when I think about the style, oh, okay, one word maybe that comes to my mind when it comes to style, it's gritty. So gritty, the kind of look, it's really hard to define it, but not the super smooth look. So by gritty, I mean clearly showing where the darker areas are, just to have this contrast between way darker parts and elements which stand out, and that look just like kind of mean. Hard to really pinpoint it, but I think gritty is the one word. If I was to break it down to one word, this would be it. And by gritty, I also mean not shying away from using like elements like dark, like dry pigments on the clothes. For example, here, using a splatter of blood here and there. That would be my take on what gritty means to me. Yeah. Now, the sword. Still plenty of time left. At least half an hour by my count, or even more. So why don't I start working on the blade? I've outlined just this bluish crystals here, but might need to rework them later on. Because the thing is that this is the same type of blue that I used, roughly the same type of highlight that I used on the cloak. So I want some differentiation here. So let's start with Black Templar. And let's tackle this massive blade. It's maybe not the largest, but probably the broadest sword of them all. Maybe Nekima has a bigger one. Not sure about it. It's like this Koshai blade. Not sure if that's the proper name, but it's like a family heirloom that he inherited from the Mikhails of the times gone by. So I'll outline all the black areas with black. Okay, about 35 minutes. That's a lot of time left. So I may be able to paint the sword, I may not. I think that at this point, what I don't manage to paint during the stream, I will just paint offline. I'll just add the finishing touches to the base, because painting the base is just not, it's pretty straightforward. It's a glaze, then it's a dry brush, then it's a few glazes more, attaching static grass, bringing in the dark pigment, dried pigment, and that's it. And I'm sorry if you cannot see at this point from this angle clearly what I'm working on, but just next to impossible to. I'm struggling myself to have a clear view. Just want to make sure I have solid black going on the whole surface. If I stain other elements with black, I can quickly remove it with just a clean brush, so no biggie if things don't work exactly like I want them to at this stage. As Bob Ross would say, no mistakes, happy little accidents. As long as you can fix them quickly and they don't ruin hours of work, then those are happy accidents. Confusing spray paint with varnish spray, that wouldn't be a happy little accident, that would be a disaster. But those are things that can be easily fixed. And I'm just trying to get a good angle to make sure I cover all the sections of the blade. Yeah, mostly there, and there's still part of white showing, so I'll make a black spot there. Again, tinted the blue cloak, so removing it with my brush, and yeah, that's it. Okay, sorry if that was difficult to follow, but I struggled myself to keep a good angle on the miniature. So now it's time to give a bit of definition to the buttons. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them here. 2 more over there. And I'm making sure that the black here goes a bit beyond the button so that it creates this natural darker spot around it. There is also an element that will be painted with, I believe, gold. The same at the back. So this is something that keeps it connected to the cloak. And also on the straps on the belt, both in the midsection and on the boots. And while working on metallics, I mean, there are different ways you can do it. Non-metallic metal is one of the approaches, which is a really slow process unless you master it in the most efficient way. I've tried it a couple of times and it's just so time consuming. Can look great if it's well done, but can have this cartoony look as well. There is a high risk of making it look cartoonish, which I don't really want. I'm about this gritty look. That's why I'm using the old-fashioned metallics. So it's easy to just overdo it, put too many highlights, glazes. So I'll try to keep it simple and effective. And the color, the black on the blade, not what I want. Still the base coat is showing through. So I'll grab something heavier. So just, it's called Negro Black. So it's a very solid black color from Vallejo model range. Very thick as well, so it needs a little bit of watering down, just thinning it down slightly. And making sure I test it on the bottom, spread it evenly. And this will create a very good base coat to work on. As you can see, it's solid black. No base coat showing through now. I'll just grab a slightly thinner brush. And I'm already beginning to think what I will be painting on my next stream next week at the same time. And I'm hesitating between Teddy and Nekima. But I reckon I will just go with Nekima. The new M3E model. I mean the new, it's not brand new, but it's the latest version of Nekima. Probably not my favorite. I would say that my favorite is either the first ever released version back in the day when Malifaux was only cast in metal. The miniatures were in metal. There's this huge, very impressive Nekima there, which is so challenging to put together because she's attached to the base just on one leg. But I also really like the M2E version. So the Bikini Demon. Yeah, very nice. She actually had a fairly similar pose here, like bent knees and this tense position that shows that she's fully ready for action. And I like that one a lot. The new one, I have it assembled. It's pretty cool. I like it. So might end up painting her next time. And this is the only one I own currently, because I've painted three different. I've painted all versions of Nekima before. Some of them more than once. But also the problem with this large metal one, it's that it's difficult to transport. When you transport it, it's just so easy for paint to chip off metals when they bounce against one another. So I think plastics are just safer to carry around. Okay, now I missed one spot that should be black as well. Over here. And I still need to remember that there is this crystal-like thing that he has on his neck. So I'll just quickly retouch it with base coat, just to make sure I don't forget about it. It would be awkward if I leave it the same color as his shirt. Don't want it to happen. Oh, and while doing the odd metal bits, let me look at the artwork. It's a bit different than what he has on the miniature, but I think here is a bit of a bracelet. So I'll just paint a separation line, which will be golden. Maybe a bit thicker. Yeah, that will look fine once it's tackled with metallics. And down here as well, seems like there is a, yeah, I think that's the way to go. And again, I'm stressing the fact that I'm using the box art for reference. I wasn't immediately clear on how to tackle the ornaments that he has in his beard, but I think I got them right now. Seems right to me. Okay. So now while it dries, I'll show you guys a quick and effective way of making nice highlights on metallic elements. So essentially we'll just need 3 colors, at least for the silver metallics. So chainmail, which is not the brightest shade of silver, and it doesn't have to be chainmail, it can be any other name. It's like this mid-tone of silver, not the bright one, not the dark one, just a... And basilicanum gray, and a much brighter silver. So essentially it will be chainmail, then a coat of basilicanum gray which tones it down, and then silver, mithril silver, so very bright silver, applied selectively to a tiny area that will make those details really pop. And what I mean by details popping is something that you see here, right? You can clearly immediately see where all the ornaments are. So let's start with chainmail. And those are the paints that don't really work that well if you thin them down with water, because the pigment separates easily. So I want to avoid it. So I will just work my way and put a thin but solid base coat on those elements. This will be silver. The buttons of the coat will be golden. And the blade is a different story. The whole sword I will paint separately. May need to happen off the stream, because I don't want to rush things. So just putting a thin layer of silver on all the metal elements here. That's why it's good to have a solid base coat, and that's why I'm always aiming to put some black around the button area, because it naturally... Okay, let me view it from a different angle here, should be clearer. As you should be able to see, if I just place a carefully place a dot of silver on this button-like thing here, there is this dark ring around it, which makes for a nice setup for Next, highlights. So that's one of the tricks, just to speed things up and make those elements look really neat. A couple dots here. And anything else that I wanted to do in silver at this point? Not really. So while I work on silver, I may as well do the gold parts as well. So I will use glorious gold, my favorite tone of gold, favorite shade of gold. So good, such good coverage. I cannot really think of any better golden color that I could recommend. And I will pick up the details here. So just the buttons. And I will also use a dark brown contrast on top of that. And then place a small dot of brighter shade of gold on that. Those here will be gold as well. Gold here too. And the beard ornaments. This is, I think, the only gold color I can think of that can be applied straight on black base coat. And with just one layer, you get this solid gold look. Typically, for gold paints, you need a couple of layers to build it up. And with this one, it's not a problem at all. You can apply it straight on black base coat and it already looks great. Yeah, so those are the golden elements. And now, toning it down. So using Basilic and Gray. Yeah, it's a great color and it's so efficient, such an efficient way of getting great results without that much effort. Now, Basilic and Gray, I'm using it directly from the pot. I'm not thinning it down, just applying it not too generously because I don't want to cover other areas, but making sure I touch those silver elements. Because then it will be just a matter of very lightly touching just tiny sections here with pure mithril silver, so any type of brighter silver than the one that I've used on the base coat. Again, silver element here, silver element here, and this is it for the silver parts. Or is it? Because I can see one more that I missed, but this one will be golden. So there is another piece here. And you see, it's quite important to look at miniature from different angle just to make sure you get all those parts right. I will retouch it with gold. So you see, it's an efficient process because while Basilic and Gray is drying, I'm already working on gold. And I will just make sure I twirl the brush to have a very good tip. And I'm leaving some black showing just to have a kind of frame for this golden element. And while this Basilicanum Grey is drying, I want it completely dry. I will apply snakebite leather. So slightly darker brown, but not very dark. This one I will thin down a little bit. Not with water though, because water breaks apart the pigmentation here and it becomes just not that good to work with. That's the consistency I'm looking for, and I will use it on these golden elements just to bring them down a little bit. They are getting the right amount of desaturation. Not sure how clearly or unclearly that is visible on the stream, but it's getting there. The same for these beard ornaments. Buttons. Yeah. Now time to pick out the light silver details. And I will just grab a smaller brush with finer tip. That should be good. And again, silver directly from the pot. And I will very lightly touch not the whole surface, but just the edge of those silver elements, just to make them really pop and stand out. Being very selective with my placement of paint here, because I don't want to ruin the previous layer of silver and glaze. So if you don't feel confident when working on such small elements, just think of it as a section that you just need to light up slightly with brighter shade. So try to aim for like upper section or lower section using the just overview of where you want the brighter elements to be. Just using the common sense. Don't need to be that fancy. So this golden ring-like thing here. Again, some here, a bit to the back. And now I will mix this bright silver, so get a bit of it, and I will mix it with gold, just to have this transition between gold shades as well. So it's this silvery gold. That's the best way to put it. And I'm trying to aim for just the middle of the button. That way, the previous glaze that I gave here will work as a nice buffer between the final highlight and the base coat. So they are still gold, but the highlights become a bit more pronounced. You can even go ahead and add a final touch of silver if you feel confident, but I would say just putting gold and then glaze and then gold mixed with silver already has a really decent result. Now, if at this point I see any areas that I feel like I could fix a little bit, I will just use black shade, not black contrast, and just lightly work around that. For example, here I thought that there was a bit too much of silver visible, and I will just tone it down with black wash. And I'm also mindful of the fact the boots will receive a lot of dry pigment, so some of details will be not that clear. So also, if you want to keep some variety with gold, one nice trick is to use either a gold wash, a yellow wash, or yellow contrast. So I will use Nazareth yellow. Just apply a little bit, test it on the palette, and I will work it over the ornaments in the beard, just because I thought there was too much contrast here between the beard and them and these elements. So now they have different saturation than other golden elements. So at this stage, we are left with just the blade and the base. The base is pretty straightforward. So I don't think I will be starting the work on the blade at this point, because it will take 30 or so more minutes. What I will do here is I will do the opposite of what can be seen on the box art. So I will paint the hilt of the blade. It will be much darker than what it is here, but the interior part will be like this copper metal, and the blades to the sides will be silvery. I am still hesitating whether I want to use some special effects on this blade, rather than keep it simple. Probably will lose some sleep over that, but well, thank you. Still not finished, but I will definitely share the final result on Wyrd Discord. And for those of you guys who are stuck to the end, please remember to vote on your Rotten Harvest entries. Kim, if you could just bring up the link again for those who joined later, that would be amazing. So guys, really make sure to give some proper respect there in the comments. You can still win a prize if you are one of those, or one who is randomly selected from those people who commented on all the entries. So plenty of time to do it before the day is over. Cast your votes. And I guess we'll very soon find out who the winners are. It's quite exciting. Lots of good stuff there. Yeah, thank you. This is the link. Perfect. So guys, go ahead, vote, and make sure you check in the streams that are happening tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And then on Monday, it's going to continue for sure. So next week, I think I will present to you the final effort here. And I will also start most likely on Nekima, or maybe on a Teddy. I will make up my mind for sure. But thank you guys for sticking to the end. And once again, cast your votes, keep on happy painting, stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of the day or night wherever you are. Take care, everyone. See you on the next stream. Bye.